blessing. We're studying, of course, in chapters 13 through 16 of the book of Judges presently. And I'm just going to be straightforward and honest with you about this particular study. It poses some difficulties for me, not serious ones, but it raises a lot of questions that you probably will have as we go through these chapters. Some of them I probably won't be able to answer for you. I may not have an adequate answer for you, because there's some things about the life of Samson that just don't seem to add up to me. And I want to say this about him as a judge in Israel. Someone was asking me, I think it was this morning or sometime earlier this week, what was the time frame for Samson? And my guess is Samson was born probably about the same time Samuel was born. They lived in the same period of time. He was at least during the time of Samuel. And there was that period of 40 years when the Philistines dominated in the coast of Israel and put Israel under their yoke, if you will, or under their neck or under their foot. And so this lasted for about 40 years. It ended somewhere around 1 Samuel 7, primarily during the time of Samuel. You remember in that famous declaration, "Here I raise my Ebenezer," after that great battle with the Philistines. Hither by your help we've come. And so God was, of course, receiving the credit from that great judge for that great victory. But then, of course, David in 2 Samuel 5 ultimately, finally vanquished the Philistines. They never were a threat to Israel again, never challenged them anymore. They continued to live there on the coast until the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So we of course, were looking at that last week. I was looking at that last week. Y'all were looking at a bat. And I didn't know that. That's probably a good thing. I didn't need to know that there was a bat in the baptistry. I just thought, wow, y'all are really paying attention again. And I didn't realize that I had frozen the screen, and I'm watching my slideshow, and you didn't see a thing. And so no one questioned me. And you think I have all this up here just for good looks? Anyway.
I just thought you might have forgotten. You are getting up in age, right?
Am I?
I think he forgot one Sunday, didn't he?
Something. Yeah, it's happening more frequently. So who were the Philistines when we talked about that again briefly last week? Just kind of bring you up to speed. They were from, I believe, the island of Cyprus originally. They were descendants of Ham. They were quite formidable. In fact, at one time, not long after Israel even came in and settled the land of Canaan, they attempted to invade Egypt, which, kind of a remarkable thing. Of course, Egypt had been diminished quite a bit since Israel had left their borders. But they attempted an invasion there, wasn't successful. They continued, of course, there where they were pretty much until the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which is much later than the time of Samson and Samuel. So again, they were constantly there, and we read about them quite a bit, and they, of course, they play a major role in the life of Israel. In chapter 13, which we read last week, I'm just going to rehearse this very quickly. We read about the parents of Samson, how the angel of the Lord, which we identified as the Lord, came to visit and to announce that Samson would be born, which, again, of the judges, that would make him unique. I don't know that any other judge, unless I'm missing something, was ever said would be born in this way and was called before he was born to be a judge in Israel. Something else you might want to think about, and this is interesting too, and it will be obvious when we study the life of Samson, is that Samson was single-handedly taking on the Philistines. The other judges, they would amass an army. And when Gideon, of course, just 300 initially, but he, of course, later had more than that. But initially just 300, but at least he had a small army. Samson had no one working with him. And he took out a lot of Philistines. He was a formidable foe and was hated and despised, of course, by the Philistines. He was the strongest man, many would say, that ever lived. It would seem, from what we read about him, that he was a very strong man, and his strength came from the Lord. It wasn't that he ate a spinach every day, but it was that he was a Nazarite, and as long as he maintained the long hair, I'm biting my tongue. There's a lot of things I want to say about the long-haired hippie, harlot-chasing judge, but I mean, that's basically how you would describe Samson. That's what he was. And yet, he was called by God. So it's troubling to me. I'll be honest with you. It troubles me because he was a man that seemed to lack any kind of character. He did have character, and there were times when it would shine. And then there were other times when it was really bad. So I don't know how we are supposed to rectify that in our minds. Yes.
Cyrus was called God's servant.
Yes.
But he was probably polytheistic.
Yes.
And had evil ways as well as good ways.
That's true.
Since God could use Cyrus to deliver Israel, he could use Samson, though he did wicked things to deliver Israel.
That's all true. I agree with that. Of course, I don't know that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Cyrus to do amazing things like Samson, but I guess what troubles me is that you're going to see, when you've already read the story of Samson, but it looks like whenever he got mad or jealous, that whenever he got emotionally distraught, that's when the Spirit of the Lord would come upon him, and it's almost like his emotions are on steroids, and I'm like, is that all it is? Or obviously there's more to it, and I'm not suggesting that's all it is, because God was using him to bring about his will against the Philistines. So he was a valid judge, and God did use him. But it's interesting when you think about how he did it. Now, I mentioned that Israel served the Philistines for 40 years, and it was stated in verse 1 of chapter 13 that Samson would begin to save Israel. He did not utterly rout or defeat the Philistines. He did a lot of damage among the Philistines, but he did not overcome them totally. And so the wording is also significant because he began to save Israel from them. Yes?
Weren't the Philistines rather large people?
I don't know. I never met one. Why?
You should know.
Well, I don't know everything. I didn't told you I don't know, but
Wasn't Goliath the Philistine?
yeah, Goliath. There were some people from Gath that had 6 fingers and toes too. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they had a nuclear power plant around. I don't know. But there were some anomalies, genetic anomalies there. But he was a large man, but I don't think necessarily the Philistines as a whole were that large. I think he was just of a family of giants among the Philistines. But again, I don't know. They were descendants of Ham, so they were racially different than the Israelites. They were warring-like people. There's something interesting, too, about the occupation of the Philistines in Israel is the way in which it's described as opposed to other occupations. The other occupations involved warring raids into the borders of Israel. It seems like if you read the text just as it's written, and that's how we should read it, of course, that really the Philistines kind of just took over. And Israel sort of acquiesced. It's almost like they took over all the commerce, all the trade. They controlled the tools. They controlled the weapons. They kind of like China. They made everything. They did everything, and Israel was beholden to them. And it's interesting to note that when they came to arrest Samson, it was 3,000 Israelites that came to do that. And they were mad at Samson because of what he had done and upsetting the Philistines. And you don't want to upset the Philistines. By the way, I heard somebody here in America say that recently to our athletes in China. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm getting sidetracked. But, we want to be careful that we don't fall victim to thinking about these things as they relate today. But isn't it amazing how human history just doesn't change and human nature doesn't change? But again, Israel kind of just gave in and the Philistines kind of took over. The angel of the Lord, we know, appeared to him. Now, this is very significant because, as we identified last week, the angel of the Lord is not merely an angel as we would understand that term generally. This is a pre-incarnate visitation, or he may have come in the flesh. I don't know exactly how he was presented to Manoah and to his wife, but this is Jesus. That's how we know him. It's just cut to the chase, make it easy to understand. Jesus. He wasn't called Jesus at this point. He wasn't born of the Virgin Mary yet, so he didn't have that name. In fact, that comes up too in chapter 13. What is your name? And he said, it's too wonderful. I think the literal translation is, you can't comprehend it, so I'm not going to give it to you. So he didn't answer Manoah's question when he asked him what his name was. But there is a name given of him, and he does describe himself in a certain way. But remember when he came to offer him, or offer sacrifice to him, offer a goat, he wouldn't eat it, but when the fire was lit, he went up, the King James said, gloriously in the flame out of their sight. And Manoah was so disturbed about it, he said, because he had seen God. And by the way, no angel receives worship from men. And so this worship was offered, and it was accepted, but only God can receive worship. So this is a visitation from God to this couple. So that says something about Manoah and his wife. And I keep saying his wife because her name is not given. But she's the mother of Samson, whoever she was, whatever her name was. But again, that's a significant fact. Now, one thing that we didn't discuss last week, and I want to touch on it now, because this is what the angel of the Lord said about him, is that he would be, in essence, a Nazarite from his birth. Even before, he was born, the mother was told not to drink any hard drink or anything that came of the vine. And if you want to know about the law of the Nazarite, we read about it in Numbers chapter 6, and I'll touch on it very quickly here. This is from the law of Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering, to take the vow of a Nazarite. Now, it's important to note here in this chapter, Moses is contemplating someone taking a vow to be a Nazarite for a period of time. But now, Samson was born a Nazarite, and it was God's will that he live his entire life as a Nazarite, as was Samuel, as was John the Baptist. So those are the three people we know that were born and lived perpetually as Nazarites, according to the code of the Nazarite. But typically, the Nazarite vow was taken by anyone, and it was for a period of time. It wasn't indefinite, like in the case of Samson. But anyway, he to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine, nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, from seed to skin. All the days of the vow of his separation no razor shall come upon his head, until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister, when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he shall be holy to the Lord. He goes on, but again, you get the idea that there were strict rules and regulations about the Nazarite, and the three that stand out here: nothing that comes of the grape, can't cut your hair, and can't get around dead bodies. And that's what's required of a Nazarite. And that's what the angel of the Lord said would be the case with Samson. And again, I mentioned Samuel was another such individual. John the Baptist, another such individual who had a lifetime Nazarite vow that they lived with. John the Baptist, of course, being called also from his mother's womb. Now, something is very significant, and I want to take a moment here in verse 8 of chapter 13 before we proceed. When Manoah had, for the second time, invited the Lord, asked the Lord to come back so he could talk to him. He wanted to see, who's this guy that came to see my wife, the unnamed woman? Who came to see her, and what did he say? Well, when the angel of the Lord came back, he said exactly what he said to the unnamed wife. He didn't change anything, but he did ask this question in verse 8 of chapter 13, and let's just turn there very quickly and read it together. Manoah is speaking. He prayed to the Lord and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born." I can't think of anything more needed today, any generation, but in particular today, for any parent, than to pray, God, help me know how to raise this child, how to teach this child. Now, one of the things I mentioned in our class this morning, in our study of Ephesians, something that came up in the news. I read it. I didn't hear it. I read it. That's different. I made the class aware of that. I saw it and I read it and I thought, well, I'm going to keep that in my mind. But, you know, there's a movement right now in Florida, and I guess you may have heard about this. Ron DeSantis, the other Republicans there in the state, are sponsoring a bill that will force teachers in public schools not to teach small children questions about homosexuality and gender designation. In other words, you're not going to be able to tell a kindergarten, are you sure you're a boy? Are you sure you're a girl? Are you sure you like little boys? Are you sure you like little girls? This is sick, twisted, evil stuff that's everywhere in our country. It's everywhere. This is what they're teaching our kids. So in Florida, they decided, we're going to stop that. President Joe Biden made a statement regarding that proposed legislation. He called it hateful, and that's a quote, hateful. That's a hateful piece of legislation. And he went on to explain that he wants the LGBT and whatever other letters they throw in there now, that community to know and understand we love you and we accept you the way you are. And so poor little you guys that have your godless agenda, we're going to defend you. And those mean people down there in Florida, we're going to make them look bad. That's what's going on today, and that's what's happening in public education. And what fascinates me, and I mentioned this in class this morning, a lot of this was not known. A lot of this stuff was by me. I knew it for a long time. I've been screaming about it for a long time. Lost my hair over it, but nobody would listen to me. And I'm like, you need to understand this is not good, what's happening. But now, because of COVID, all across the country, parents are like, what? You're teaching my kid that? Yeah, that's what they're teaching our kids. And so they're waking up. I think that's a grand thing. So if we can say something good has come from COVID, that's one good thing. Is that we have parents now engaged, and they need to be engaged. God gave the responsibility for raising children to the government and to the community. What some people say, takes a village. But I thought God made families for a reason. You know, that's what happens to us. This is something I've been screaming about for 30 plus years. We are in a battle today, brethren, over worldviews. And I know that's confusing sometimes. People don't understand how that it affects us in very practical, very serious ways. When you don't believe in God, when you think we're the products of evolution, you're going to view life very differently than I do. You're going to react to things differently than I do. You're going to think differently than I think about every issue that comes up, regardless of what it is. And so we have people that do not believe in God, or at least they are suppressing a knowledge of God because they have a godless agenda. So they've suppressed this knowledge, and they've decided, based on this godless worldview, to do certain things. And that's what's playing out before us. We need to be aware. It's not really just, liberal and conservative. We're talking about right and wrong, good and evil. We're talking about a godly worldview versus a godless worldview. That's what it boils down to. And that's where the stakes are today. And I think it's grand that we're reminded in chapter 13, verse 8 in 1 Samuel, that Manoah, a great man, a good father, chosen by God to raise this judge in Israel, that he was visited by the Lord. And he asked the Lord, when you come see us again, I want you to teach us what we should say. God has taught us what to teach our children. And Moses said to the nation of Israel, you need to teach your children diligently, rising early in the morning. He didn't say send them to public school, let them do it. Now, I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that as a parent, you need to be aware of what your children are subjected to. And you need to, as a Christian, combat the godlessness that they are subjected to every day. It's a true battle. And you can't take it, lightly. It's a very, very serious matter. Anyway, that's my soapbox for now. I'm done. Sorry. So Manoah asked, what is your name? And the Lord answered, it's really too hard for you to understand. Now, it is interesting because in verse 11, Manoah arose and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he spoke to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? He wouldn't even call her by name. I got my anniversary coming. I can't help. I'm going to digress. I got an anniversary coming up next Monday. For the first 2 or 3 years of marriage, hey, you. Regina, you asked Regina. He never called me by my name. I just, hey, you. And she finally said, I got a name. I'm like, okay. So she does. She has a name. But then here's Manoah, and he said, yeah, the woman. I'm like, this is wife. What was her name? I don't know. He wouldn't even say her name. But anyway, maybe that's why the Lord would, I'm going to tell you my name. We'll call your wife by name. But he said, I am. And this is in quotation marks. And I don't think we should make too little of this. In John 8, Jesus was confronting the Jews, and they were accusing him of blasphemy and everything else. And he made mention of the fact, about the days of Abraham. You're not 50 years old, you're talking about Abraham? He said, before Abraham was, I am. And they wanted to stone him. Why? Why would they want to stone him for saying that? That was a declaration of deity, wasn't it? Yes. I am. And remember when Moses spoke to this same individual from the burning bush? Who shall I say sent me? I am that I am. And so the great I am. And here, this is significant. I mean, when you read those texts in Revelation 4 and 5, all of creation before the throne of God is bowing prostrate before this individual, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he's visiting this Israelite couple, and he's telling them, you're going to have a son. And so this is very, very significant. And so I am. I mentioned this text here in Isaiah 9. When you think about the name of the Lord, he's described in so many ways. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and we could go on. I remember one time Steve Pitt, maybe you remember him, I remember he got on a roll one day. I mean, he would just go on. That was amazing. I thought he had all these different designations from the Bible, and they were accurate. But it's amazing when you think of the ways that God describes himself and how he speaks of himself and expects us to speak of and about him. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. So any question about chapter 13?
It's funny you say that because my wife's not here.
Okay.
Tell me well. It's actually Greek meaning ego imi. It means I am or I exist.
I exist. That's interesting, isn't it? Not I was, not I will be, I am. Is that present perfect? It is, and it's just continuing process. I am. Wow. When you're a kid, you ask that question, well, where did God come from? Or what did God do before he created the world? You know, those kind of questions come up all the time. And when you think about I am, you've answered all those questions. Chapter 14. Of course, the last part of the chapter 13 just says she bore Samson. But I will read this, verse 25 of the last chapter 13. The Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahani Dan between Zorah and Ashtel. So he was definitely blessed by God, and he was filled with the Spirit of the Lord. Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and he told his father and mother, saying, I've seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. He one of the Walmart kids, you know. Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. Now if you have an English Standard Version, it reads differently. She's right in my eye. I like the way she looked. He hadn't even spoken to her, by the way. That's interesting, isn't it? He just liked the way she looked. Now, it's something to think about, because you remember what Jesus said, if your right eye offends you, what should you do with it? Why? It's better to enter into life with one eye than having two eyes to be cast into hell fire. Samson would suffer a horrible death and end because he couldn't control his eyes. So he goes to the small village among the Philistines, and he finds this good-looking girl. Get her for me. But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now again, I want you to notice the wording in verse 4. It doesn't sound like so much a military occupation. It's just, they just controlled things. They were in charge, and Israelites knew it. Now, to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. He went down and talked with the woman, finally, and she pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. Numbers chapter 6. What should a Nazarite not do? And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the... By the way, what should an Israelite man not do with a Philistine woman? Shouldn't marry her. Okay. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating, and when he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. I can imagine why he didn't tell them, because they would have scolded him. They wouldn't have eaten it, because he's a Nazarite. Had no business doing that. So his father went down to the woman. Samson gave a feast there, for a young man used to do so. And it happened when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. Samson said to them, Let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And they said to him, Pose your riddle so that we may hear it. He said to them, Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Now for 3 days they could not explain the riddle. It came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, Entice your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house. But these were not nice people. I mean, wow. We're going to burn you alive. You don't tell us the riddle. I mean, have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? No, you're going to impoverish us. I mean, we can't afford what he's thrown at us. So Samson's wife wept on him. You only hate me. You do not love me. You pose a riddle of the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. And by the way, if you want to think about his weak character, he said to her, look, I have not explained it to my father and mother, so should I explain it to you? And she wept on him the 7th day while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her. He's trusting a Philistine woman because she pressed him so much, and she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? He said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Askelon and killed 30 of their men, took their clothing, gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, not appeased. I think that's significant. Okay, he killed these 30 men by the Spirit of the Lord, brethren. That's what the text says. But now that he's done that, now his anger's aroused. And he went back to his father's house. Why is his anger? Who's he mad at? Her. And Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. Wow, this ain't going too well. Okay, let's just, we have to kind of stop here in the middle. I know, hold your breath, we'll get there, but this is an interesting man in a lot of ways. And we see an interesting character in Samson. That's putting it mildly. Men, don't call your wife a heifer. That's probably not the thing. And it appears that they have not yet consummated their marriage. They're legally married, but I don't think anything's happened yet. Now, that's what most commentators suggest. Some say maybe they did, but most suggest no, they probably hadn't yet consummated the marriage. That's why after he left, she was given to his best man. Some say that for the father of the bride to save face. But anyway, here's what's interesting about this woman from Timnah, and it's about the parents' objection to Samson going to her. They pleaded with him, as any decent Israelite parent would do, why are you going among the uncircumcised? Why would you do this? And yet the text says they did not know it was of the Lord. And the Lord allowed this because he was seeking occasion to assault the Philistines.
I got a question.
That's interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if he was a Nazarite and they're not supposed to go near a dead body, and he's killing all these Philistines, how does that match?
I told you before we started the class tonight. I mean, I can't answer that question. All I know is that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he killed 30 men of the Philistines and took their clothes and kept the vow. He did his part of the deal. He didn't say how he was going to get the clothes. He was a dude, but he got their clothes. But the thing is, and this is fascinating to me, because going to a Philistine was forbidden by God to the people of Israel. He had no business by law, God's law, to do what he was doing with this woman. And yet, and his parents were pointing that out to him, and yet, the text says they did not know it was of the Lord. Now, the Lord's not causing him to do this. The Lord's not enticing him to do anything wrong. The Lord's not tempted with evil. That's not what's happening here. But this man cast longing eyes on her. He liked the way she looked. And after he talked to her, he liked the way she talked too. So he liked her. And he wanted her. And he married her in violation of God's law and the pleas of his parents. And yet God was able to use that. Now, I don't know about you, I find this fascinating. Because this is providence at work. We have a miraculous manifestation of God's Spirit, but we also have providence on hand. You remember when, well, let me back up here. In our class on Ephesians, chapter 3, verses 10 through 11, Paul talks about the mystery, that is the knowledge that was in God's mind from all eternity, that's only now been revealed to the sons of men. Okay, that knowledge involved Jesus dying for our sin. That was God's plan all along. So Paul said in Galatians 4 that in the fullness of time, when everything was just right, God sent forth his son. Now, did God himself crucify Jesus? Of course not. Who crucified Jesus? Well, the Romans. But at whose behest? They're doing this to satisfy the blood cry of the Jewish people. So everybody's guilty. But men crucified Jesus. Now, did God manipulate them and make them do that? No. In fact, when he was standing before Pilate noted the motivation for these people in bringing Jesus here was what? Envy. They're jealous of him. They can't compete with him. So they're going to kill him. They literally killed Jesus to silence him and get him out of their way and take the spotlight off of him and bring it back to themselves. So they were envious of him. He was a threat to their position. And so they killed him. God did not make them do that. And Peter later would say, you took with lawless hands and crucified the Prince of Life. And they did. And yet, it was God's plan that they do that. I don't know about you, that's fascinating to me. Because God didn't make them do it. He did not orchestrate it, but he knew it would happen.
Well, he rules, though.
He rules.
Men, and
He uses men, but in the case of killing Jesus, for example, or these Philistines, or Samson marrying this woman, it was a sin to kill Jesus. I mean, that's a sin. And yet, it was God's will. That's hard to get your mind around. It's God's will, but it's a sin. God's not wanting us to sin, of course, but their sin brought about God's purpose. And that's what's happening here. His sin brought about God's purpose. And that's stated in this text, which would explain perhaps part of my question. Why would God use a man of such weak character? Well, because he was the perfect vessel to bring about the kind of raids and what's another word to describe the business of Samson with the Philistines? How would you describe it? They didn't go on too well. He liked their women, but that's about it. Yes, you had a comment?
Just kind of going back to your idea of God using them. You kind of went a little bit different than where I thought you were going, but to me, a fascinating study is the genealogy of Jesus.
Yes.
Matthew chapter 1. If you just look at the women
Oh, yeah.
that are mentioned in that genealogy.
Oh, yeah.
And two of them were Gentiles. One of them was
The daughter-in-law to Judah, wasn't it?
one of them was the daughter-in-law of Judah, Tamar, and then Bathsheba. And that's the genealogy
Yeah.
of our Savior.
Yeah.
That God would use that he could take what we screwed up, what man messed up, and bring about something.
Isn't that beautiful, though?
It is.
How God can do that. What we've messed up, he makes beautiful. And when you think about the purpose of the church and what happens when we become members of the church, why do we become members of the church? To fix the mess that we made, the sin that we brought into our lives and the lives of other people. And then God completely changes that. We're born again. We're born all over again, made living stones, part of his house, part of his building. We are God's temple, God's dwelling place. What a marvelous thing, how God can take something so useless, garbage, and make it into something so beautiful. And that's how God works. He changes what we've mired and makes it beautiful. And again, he took this character, this individual, and used his weakness, in fact, to bring about his will. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Now, I will say this about Samson. But this line caught him by surprise. And it's almost like he was startled, you know. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon him when he was startled. Just like the Spirit of the Lord came upon him when he was mad. It's just amazing to see the connection between what is taking place with him and the Spirit of the Lord working with him. It just lets me know that the Spirit of the Lord is far more versatile in what he can do or how he works with us than just prophetic utterances or, you know, working of miracles in the typical sense we think of them. I mean, the Spirit of God's amazing, beyond our comprehension. But again, here's Samson. He takes with his bare hands, kills a lion with his bare hands. What is it? Is there a bat in the baptistry?
No, sir.
Okay, I have to ask. I got to ask. Y'all won't tell me anything. What? You haven't seen one lately? So we go to Samson's riddle, and of course they couldn't guess it. And they go to her, and they said, "Hey, tell us or we're going to burn you alive." I mean, I don't know about you. If I was this woman, I'd move. I'd find someplace else to live. I don't think I want to live with people like that. I mean, that's mean. I mean, you're talking about 30 pieces of clothes, and you're going to burn me and my family alive? Yeah, and they did. They did burn her alive. That's the next chapter, but, I mean, this is terrible. But he gives them the riddle, and they, of course, got it from her. What's tragic, again, to see the weakness of his character, he trusts a Philistine. That was foolish. Why would this judge in Israel be there to start with, number one? Number two, why would you trust? Almost got in trouble.
Yeah,
I did. You saw that coming. You knew what I was going to say about women, didn't you?
I mean, in her defense.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it. I want to hear it. Yeah. Okay, it's good.
She was being threatened to be burned to death.
Okay.
He was just going to lose some money.
Okay. All right. Okay, I got you. You're right. It's not her defense of why she did it. It's how she brought it about. That's the unfair advantage that women have always had. You know, Adam really should have argued that when in the garden. I mean, she's just so persuasive. I mean, but anyway.
he was still lost.
I mean, huh?
He was still lost, Adam.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
I'm not arguing that. So Samson decides he's going to keep up this end of the bargain, and so he went to Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their clothes, and did what he said he was going to do. Now, any questions about chapter 14?
If he killed these men and took their clothes, did he actually take them himself or somebody else? That's what he got on a dead body.
He made them dead.
and took their clothes.
You have to be around them to make them dead. And later he's going to have heaps of dead bodies. I mean, it's not like he just was around a dead body. Heaps of dead bodies. Anyway, I'm like Don. I'm like, but that's part of the Nazarite. I mean, yes.
But of course, you call your wife a heifer is not very sweet. But Amos spoke of the cows.
Yes, he
The
did.
family, talking about women.
He did.
Yeah.
Amos was not a popular preacher, by the way. They ran him out of town, but could have been that reason. I'll read just the first few verses of chapter 15. We don't have time to get into all of it because we got to kind of finish up this part, this narrative. Because it says that after a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go into my wife, into her room," but her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, "I really thought that you were thoroughly hated her. Therefore, I gave her your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead." Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes, took torches, turned the fox's tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain as well as the vineyards and olive groves. And the Philistines said, who did this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite. Oh, now he's a son-in-law. I thought the father said, well, he's not really, anyway. Because he has taken his wife and given her to the companions of the Philistines, came up and burned her and her father with fire. Yeah, I think I would have moved a long time ago. You know, when you mess up, you know, I never have, but I've heard of men in marriages that have really done something bad, and they've offended their wife somehow, and you wanted to make up, you kiss and make up. Did the idea of giving a goat ever cross your mind? What he brought? He brought her a goat. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, different times, right? I mean, times they've changed, but Valentine's Day is next Monday. So if you know of any goats, you might come up with a very novel gift for your significant other, and maybe she'll appreciate it, you know. Or she might burn down a house with you in it. I don't know.
It's amazing that God used Samson the way he did, and then James tells us that we need to be slow to speak, you know, and in other words, we don't need to let our emotions take a hold of us. We need to stop and think about what we're doing as Christians. But in his case,
God uses emotions. He's an interesting character. There ain't no two ways about it. I mean, no way, no how you can study Samson and not come away, Donna, with a lot of questions. I'm like, I don't know. I guess there's one reassuring thing here, and I'm not suggesting that we continue in sin that grace may abound, but isn't it good to know that God can take imperfect people and use them? I hope so, because I know I'm not perfect, so, you know, but God can use imperfect people, and he certainly used Samson.
a friend of mine preached on Samson and didn't realize he called him Tarzan all the way through.
Called him Tarzan? Sounds like something I might have done. Huh? I'm sorry to hear that. 816 in your song books. Good to see Terry with us tonight. He had his eye procedure this morning. Went well. He survived it. He's with us. Good to see my daughter-in-law here with us tonight, and she's still doing well. And please remember her and our new baby that's going to be here, we don't know, but anytime, shortly, at least by next Monday. In fact, if the baby's not here by Monday, they're going to induce her. So on my anniversary, I'll maybe have another grandbaby. So just hang in there. I'm walking out the door that way. I'm dismissed. But anyway. Yes, I know this. Where's Lily? She stuck her tongue out at me last week and said, I'm having a birthday next week, and ran off. And I didn't forget it. But where is Lily? She hadn't got up here yet? I'm not sure why these children stick their tongue out at me. I don't understand that. Happy birthday, Lily, tomorrow. So, are you going to sing happy birthday to her when we dismiss? Because you normally do that anyway, but it's your child. You got it? Oh, wait till the prayer is over, please. And, okay. No, we'll wait till the prayer is over. Thank you. Registration forms are due to Chris Johnson by this coming Sunday. Please let him know if you have any questions. This past Lord's Day, When we came to service, we unfortunately had to announce that George and Diane Adair's daughter, Noelle, passed away. Complications from COVID and a major surgery she had just recently gone through. But anyway, 51 years of age, early Sunday morning. Early this morning, Wednesday morning, George Adair fell dead in his living room and is gone to be with the Lord. And so Sister Adair desperately needs our support and our help. I cannot imagine. I asked her this morning as they were taking him out, we draped him with an American flag per his request. He had requested, if I ever die in the house, cover me with a flag. And his son was there to make sure that was done. I'm glad that he did. But as we were carrying him out, I asked, how long had y'all been married? She said, 52 years. So their baby girl was born the next year, and she went Sunday, and he went today. That, I don't know about you, that just breaks my heart. And I certainly want to remember Sister Adair. Where is he at? Do you have any update on AJ?
No, other than what I told you this morning.
Okay.
Scheduled for him.
So he did go see an orthopedic.
Today's his birthday, by the way.
Oh, did that? If he's listening, happy birthday, AJ. Be 12 today? 13. Ooh. Oh yeah, that's a tough age. We've been praying for his parents. Yes.
A friend of mine, his name is Henry, I can't think of his name, Howell, had quadruple heart surgery yesterday. And his wife Judy is in horrible. She has to have like 4 or 5 different organs in her body replaced. So her health is really bad. And
He had quadruple bypass.
I
Wow.
believe they're members at Georgia.
West Georgia. What's the name again?
The Howells, Henry and Judy Howell.
Henry and Judy Howell. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
You know Henry?
I've heard the name, yeah.
Let's remember them in our prayer.
I don't remember, but I know they are members at now Carrollton Church.
Yeah, they've changed the name to Carrollton, by the way.
Yeah, beginning of the year.
Yeah. Carrollton Church of Christ. They've dropped West Georgia. 816 is the,
Pastor,
yes.
Wallace Coleman, they're gonna have a memorial service February 26th.
Who's this?
Wallace Coleman that worked for Ricky that passed
Yes.
away. His memorial service gonna be February 26th.
Okay.
I think it's Bethany United Methodist. That's his daughter Denise is having they cremated her, and she's having a really hard time.
Would you make sure to get that information to Chris so we can give it to Deanna and get it in our bulletin?
Yeah, I'll do
We'll have time to get that announced.
remember them, because this is really hard on his daughter.
In our class in the auditorium tonight, we were looking at the life of Samson, a very unusual character, put it mildly. And I was wondering out loud even, some of you were as well, how God could use someone like Samson. And I don't know that we have all the answers to that, but it is reassuring to know that God can use imperfect people to do his will. And I believe when we think about it, we all have to be grateful for that, because we are all imperfect. And we all are in need desperately of God's grace and God's mercy and forgiveness. When we sing this song of invitation, it's been announced, it's a convenient time, not the only time, but a convenient time, for anyone present who's never yet named the name of Christ and put their Lord on in baptism. Make that decision tonight. Make that right before you leave here through gospel obedience. Or if you need to be restored to your rightful place among the people of God, this would be a wonderful time for you to make that need known, and let us pray with you and for you. If we can assist you in either of these ways, please let that be known while together we stand and as we sing.
Let us great at the door.